Good morning. We look today at James chapter 5, and the headline in my Bible says, Rich oppressors will be judged. And then it starts with, Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord. I mean, he's really chewing them out. And, as I read that earlier, I thought about, the reports and the things in the news I've read lately, about how during the pandemic, the super rich have made so much money and they are so much richer. And the middle class or the people like you and me, how much tougher it's gotten for so many of us that way. And I think about the pharmaceutical companies and the profits that they have made, and I just wonder, I mean, about the greed and about all of that. And you hear so much on the news about, especially with COVID, and things that could work or might work against COVID, and how some are being suppressed and held back, but the companies that have made the vaccines and the vaccine supplements or the boosters, the enormous profits that they've made in these last year and a half or 2 years, and it really, this chapter to me just speaks to those people and those companies that are doing that. And I know that even in the years past that some of the prescription drugs for us here in the United States cost so much more than prescription drugs for people in other countries, just because of we're more able to afford them. Well, really? I mean, it shouldn't make any difference if they sell uh, a drug for this much money here, they should sell the drug for the same money other places. Or if they sell people would be going to Canada or to Mexico because they get things cheaper. But so here, I mean, the warning in James is the greed. Greed isn't one of those things. It's that love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And it's the love of profits, the need of profits. And I think about hearing of the massive amounts of money that specific people make or lose in the stock market, on a day's time when, with a rumor or whatever it might be. And then I think too of our farmers and our ranchers, and how as farmers and ranchers we're totally, at the will and at the whim of the buyer. We have, I mean, I shouldn't say we, I'm not a farmer anymore, but I know the ins and outs of it, and how you sell for what you can get, and you pay for what they ask, or what they demand. You have no choice, and the massive amounts of money that some of the big processors have made in the last few years on the livestock industries, and how tight it is for those that are raising the livestock. And it's just, in verse 5, he says, You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as the day of slaughter. You have condemned yourselves. You have murdered the just, and words of warning. And not just, I'm not, I don't mean to pick on these companies and these specific people, because it speaks to us as well, to be watching out and everything. Because starting in verse 6, he says, Therefore, and the header in my Bible says, be patient and persevering, to to continue to look forward that way. It says therefore, and I've commented before, when the word therefore comes, it means because of what was just written, this is, think about these things, be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See, and then it says, see how the farmer waits for the fruit of the earth, waiting patiently until it receives the early and the later rain. Establish your hearts for the coming, because the coming of the Lord is at hand. And strengthen your hearts. Be determined. Remain true in faith. Um, and part of this, be patient until the Lord's coming, comes also because of that belief of that imminent return of the day of Jesus Christ. They were looking forward to it so much, and I do too. I mean, I look forward to the coming of Christ, to the reconciliation of God coming and calling us all to be responsible for our decisions, for who we are and everything that way. And but knowing and rejoicing that when that day comes, that God looks at me and judges me in the eyes of Jesus Christ. In verse 9, James writes, "Do not grumble against one another, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door." Just a reminder again of the tongue, and chapter 3 and chapter 4 both talked about that a little bit. It's just a reminder to be gracious, to be generous to others, and just to have an open heart and an open mind, and to be aware of other people's needs. And in verse 12, I have this one underlined again too. It says, "But above all, do not swear either by heaven or earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be a yes and your no be a no." And I think about that. How often is it that people will say yes or no, and do the opposite? And it's like Jesus' parable of when he asks which one did the will of the Father. The Father says to one son, "Go out in the vineyard and work." And he says, "Yes, Dad, I'll go," but he doesn't. The other one says, "No," but then he does. But it's when I think about when you would talk to somebody about something, and you would agree in a handshake, and that handshake was valid. It's like letting your yes be yes and your no be no. But now we've got contracts that are hundreds of pages thick and with loopholes just all over in them, And so these legally binding contracts, and I think about when I was farming and I'd sign a contract for sunflowers with a company. Well, that contract obligated me to deliver, but the company could always find a loophole to, it isn't this or it isn't that, it's this or whatever, to discount whatever it was be. And so, as a farmer, I came to realize that a contract, a legally written contract that I thought protected me, didn't always mean what I thought it meant. And so here, these words, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I mean, be upright and forthright and honor your obligations. If you say you're going to be somewhere and do something, be there and do it, and so that others can count on you. And the reality is, if you say something and then you don't do it, it's not going to be long, and people aren't going to trust you to do anything. And so it's that part of that being patient and persevering, watching out for others. When we do that, we're watching out for ourselves as well, to be an upright and honest person. And I can think of a lot of people that I've known over my lifetime that I would trust with my life, in any given instant, and other people that I wouldn't give a wooden nickel to. I mean, this is the way we get to know people, and this is the reputation that people have. And it's the people that I would trust with my life, I would gladly tell you their names. The people that I wouldn't trust with a wooden nickel, I might give you a warning, but I'm not going to just bash them. That's not what we're to do either. But to be honest and upright in our doings, and to know who we can trust, is super, super important in so much of our life that way. The next part of this chapter, pretty much talks about meeting the needs of the community. Is anyone among you suffering? Well, let him pray. And not to say that that's going to completely alleviate it, but when we pray, when we talk about our issues with God, it helps. Is anyone cheerful? Well, let him sing psalms. Is anyone sick? Call on the elders of the church and let them pray. And the prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will rise him up. And then it says, if he has committed any sins, he will be forgiven. Well, we know that we all sin, and so a promise, he will be forgiven. Wonderful, wonderful news to know. He says, confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. And then the next line, the effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man yields much. Think about that. The prayer of a righteous person can bring about a big effect. And just, when we pray, and God knows our hearts, and when we have these regular conversations with God, God knows us so well. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And so the prayer of a righteous person can yield much good. And I think about that as we gather for worship on a Sunday morning, and we lift up our prayers, and it's one of the fortunate things for me to be serving a smaller congregation like I am, that I can ask on any given Sunday for prayer requests. And it doesn't mean I'll see something if someone types it in online. I can't always read those things there, but to know that that the needs of the community, when there's a specific need, that we raise it up to God, and we offer that in prayer, and spend a while, but sometimes even in my prayers I'll say, for those concerns that we lift to you now in the silence of our hearts, to give us time for our private prayers that way, and to know that when we come to God with the needs of others, that he will hear and that he will respond. And God is always faithful in so much and everything that way. And now the very last part of James 5, this is the end of this book. Tomorrow we'll start reading the first book of Peter. But he says, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. But I think about that as each and every one of us has that responsibility to be watching out for our friends and for our neighbors. And as hard as it is sometimes to say to someone, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is against the will of God. What you're doing is against what God would have you do. For us to encourage someone to go to worship, to come to God in prayer and thanksgiving, for someone to rekindle that faith. It's hard to talk sometimes to people about our faith, and that's one of the things that I think, as a pastor at these Pride of Dakota shows that I go to, people will come to my booth and it says Pastor Russ's workshop, and they will say, "Are you a pastor?" And I say, "Yeah." Well, and I sometimes say that surprises me too, but the reality is that sometimes these people just need somebody to talk to a little bit, that they need somebody to listen, or they'll share a story. And sometimes, I'm supposed to be there to, the people to buy and sell, and sometimes they get into a conversation a little bit with somebody, and maybe there's somebody else there that's looking at something. But, to be able to listen, to have someone listen to some of these people that come to these shows, in a way, it's inconvenient for me, to be honest with you. It feels inconvenient, but the reality is that for this person, the encounter is maybe hopefully helpful, that they can share a concern, that they can ask a question. And so here it is, that if anyone wanders and someone helps him find his or her way back, what a blessing, what a wonderful way to spend a part of your day, to encourage others in their faith. So this is one of my hopes for these daily devotions that I do, is that it's an encouragement. And I know your comments and stuff, and I appreciate your comments. I appreciate you tuning in and watching and listening. And I count you guys, each and every one of you, as a blessing to me as well. So, because you all help strengthen my faith, as I hope that these morning devotions can and do for you.